probably be worthwhile to take a look at what an API looks like. As luck would have it, I've built a few lately. So I'm going to show you a very basic walkthrough of what an actual backend server looks like. This is in JavaScript, and for that I do apologize. I know that's less than ideal, but the principles should be largely the same. So we can look here. We'll start with Indexjs. This is our granddaddy file. This is what runs. And it says, hey, first I want you to import the server file that has some more specific stuff. It says, hey, I want you to set a port. This is a special variable that sets the port relative to whoever is hosting it. And this sets up the server to listen on the port we just gave it. It also prints a line for us. Let's make sure that this runs. We are in the correct folder. We will do zoop. Okay, our server is now running and listening. That's great. So let's take a look at what we've got in our server.js file. That's all this is. This is an import command, and it's just saying, before you do all this, do all the server stuff that I specified in this other file. The only reason to do this is to keep your code cleaner. It's great in a team-oriented environment, so not everyone's stepping on each other's toes. There are fewer conflicts in terms of people editing the same code. So we're going to look in this folder. You can just imagine that all this code is right here in the file. So here's our basic. We're importing a lot of what's called middleware. This is stuff you don't need to worry about. This is formalities. But here we have something that looks a bit more familiar. We just talked about doing GET requests, and here's a endpoint for GET. If we get at the empty slash, right, that means this is the root command. It's going to send back a result. There's no request being made. We're just saying get this, right? There's no data being sent up. The result is what's sent back. And in this case, we're using the result to send back the string. I did this because I was having bugs that confused me, and so I was sending back my confusion. I'm going to use a program called Postman to hit this API and show you, for example, how this works. We also actually, you know what? Let's open a new window, and let's do it from our new Python application, because that will be cool and pertinent to the last lesson. All right, so instead of going to this astronauts API, and we'll get rid of our data processing that's relative to that, we're going to look at localhost. I think that should work. Let's put in HTTP just in case. Localhost. And what port was it running on again? Lollers. Okay, that's a funny port number. All right. So that's saved. And we will just, the response in this case, let's leave that the way it is. We'll just comment that out, and we will print the response. I think the response will be text, so my guess is response.text won't change it. Let's see if this works. Python API example.py. Cross your fingers, and we got the word Fantastic. So we are actually talking to the backend server that we are running in this window over here. In fact, the logger has told us there was just a GET request. It took 4 milliseconds. I don't remember what the 3 means. It's probably cool, though. Maybe it's like the size of it. It was 3 bytes large. Something like that. Makes some sense. So let's look at some other endpoints just for the heck of it. In this case, I've also compartmentalized my endpoints into 2 subfolders relative to them. One is projects, one is actions. So let's jump into projects here. And you can see that I have a number of endpoints. Let me clean this up real quick. Zip, zip, zip. we have a straight up root. So this will actually be what we access. Let's go back to our Python code. If we were to go to localhost 42069/projects, save that, we should make an API request to that endpoint and get back a different set of things. What are we going to see? Well, we got an array, or in this case, in the case of Python, a list of objects. It's one big list, and it's all of the projects we have ahead of us. If you're me, you have to smoke pork. There's an ID associated with this, a name, smoke pork, and a description that says, make 18 pounds of delicious meat for the next week. Completed as false. That's something I should toggle, and maybe we can do that here later. We'll do that as part of the exercise once I get around to doing Python put requests. That's something that'll be fun to do. So there are a number of things here, and each project we can change the endpoint further, because you'll notice here in my server there's an endpoint written to get a project by its ID. We can go in here, we'll change our API request to get project ID number 1. We will save that, run the program, and that does appear to have given me everything, which is a bit troublesome. I am confused by that. Print response.text. Very interesting. Okay. This is project ID 1. But when you get the project by ID, you also get an array of actions. And these are older actions, right? This was the start of the test. These were the example actions in the example data. You can see the cute actions that I wrote. Action ID 2 is important job. Action ID 4 says pray and repent, which I should hope you do. And action ID 5 says description, crush it, notes, do the thing right. So this actually is getting project number 1 and a bit more specific data. That's behavior coded in at the back end. It sends a bit more information, and that's just something that I wrote in. Let's grab one other thing. In fact, there is an endpoint specifically for getting just the actions, right? If I do that, we should be able to run it. And now you see it here in our previous call, we got the whole object in addition to the actions array. This endpoint is set up to return only the actions array. So you see it starts with ID 1, project ID 1, fork and clone repository, whereas that's actually here in our previous requests. I do apologize for the hideous console. I know that's a lot to interpret. Let's take a look at our server logs. Here in our server logs, you can see, I got this, and then I got this, and then I got from this endpoint, and then I got from this endpoint. And those are all great. There's actually probably not a good reason this should be a 201. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it's not a big deal. You live and you learn. This is a console log. This is just a print statement written in the server that I was using to debug something interesting. I'll also show you something else that I did related to this, which is, let's open a new terminal here. I wrote a client specific to this API. And we can start that client, and it's actually a web app. And this is going to run on my local host as well, and this is going to be the front end to the back end that we just used. I'm going to make sure that my network tab is configured properly. Caching in Brave behaves, I guess, in a strange way because it really makes this behave strangely. So I have disabled caching for now. And I will show you, the application. So this is the very basic React application that I made. This was all part of a Lambda school project. So it's very abstract, very, what's the word for it? I don't want to say arbitrary because I feel like that has a negative connotation, but it's definitely the right word. It's pretty arbitrary. This This is a page where it lists all the projects. And ooh, they look a little nicer like this than they did as JSON objects. Wouldn't you agree? And then if I click on this, it takes me to that specific project. You can see it's getting it by ID. And now we see the actions. This action is not very descriptive. That was while I was debugging. Let's click on the first one, the one we already looked at, smoked pork. It has a description, wonderful. And then it has step-by-step, whatever. So this is just a little look at how APIs end up touching the front end and how you're going to interact with them, and just a brief look at the code. If you were going to write an API in Python, this is not where we should be looking. If you were going to write an API in Python, it would likely look very much the same, but with nicer, slightly more legible context or syntax. But this is basically what it is. You're saying for this endpoint, I want you to send this kind of data from the database, right? This says get this data from the database by this ID and then send back this data. Here's the get all the projects. It says, hey, get everything from the database, send this JSON object back. That's very similar to most APIs. They all look largely the same. You create your endpoint, you define the behavior for how you're going to process data and acquire the data you want, and then you're going to return the data that you want to give to the front end or to the whatever's accessing the API. I want to emphasize that does not need to be the front end. That can be all sorts of different things. It can be other servers. It can be back-end applications. It's just computers talking to each other, these APIs. And this is just setting up where they do it and what they do when someone talks to that URL. I appreciate you watching. I hope you do some push-ups or some squats. Don't push yourself too hard because soreness will set you back. And have a fantastic day. Thank you.